Okay, I will go ahead and call to order the Wednesday, July 1st, 2020 meeting of the Reno City Planning Commission. And I will ask, hopefully Angela can put up a flag on the screen, and then we can all stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance. Nice. All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag, States of America,
United States of America,
and to the republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. That was the most patriotic flag we've had in this meeting in the entire time I've been here, so that was excellent. Okay, Michelle, can we have roll call, please?
Kathleen Taylor. You unmute. Kathleen Taylor. Oh, we can't hear you, but she's here. Peter Gower.
Here.
John Marshall.
Here.
Paula Levis.
Here.
Alex Velto.
Here.
Mark Johnson.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you very much. Next item is public comment. For any public comment on the action item or any general public comment, Michelle, have we received any requests for public comment on this item?
I did receive a somebody to register for public comment, but they did not wish to speak, and it was for Carly Borchardt. So I don't know if she wanted to speak or not, but her registration says no.
Okay, is she on the Zoom
Is it-
waiting room?
Yeah, we can add her. Carly, can you hear us? Are you there, Carly? Did you want to speak during public comment, or are you just registered to follow along? Carly, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Barely.
Yes.
Can you hear us? Maybe we can move on and ask her again later.
Okay. Okay. Well, with that, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is election of officers. Angela, you want to brief us on what we need to do for this particular item, since it's been a year?
It has been a year. So at this point, we need to nominate both a chair and a vice chair. And because Mark has served 2 terms, you cannot serve a 3rd term. So just as a heads up, we will need to appoint a new chair.
This is where I express extreme disappointment in not being able to do that. Okay, so with that, I guess we are looking for nominations for a chair for this meeting for the upcoming year.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to nominate Vice Chair Taylor to be chairman for the upcoming year.
Thank you, Commissioner Gower. I have a nomination for Commissioner Taylor.
Alex Velto, second.
Okay. Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? I guess I should ask Commissioner Taylor. Any discussion on that?
No discussion.
Okay. I'll take a vote for that. I'll go down through my list here. All those in favor, I'll start with Commissioner Levis.
Yes.
Commissioner Taylor.
Yes.
Commissioner Marshall.
Yes.
Commissioner Gower.
Yes.
Commissioner Velto.
Yes.
And Commissioner Johnson, I also vote yes. So do you want to take over now, or do you want me to call for the election for the vice chair?
Why don't you keep at it? You're doing great.
So then I'll just finish off with that. I'm looking for a nomination for next year's vice chair.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to nominate Commissioner Marshall for vice chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Gower. I have a nomination. Looking for a second.
Alex Salto, second.
Thank you, Commissioner Belto. Once again, any discussion on that? Okay. Asking for a roll call vote once again. Commissioner Levis?
Yes.
Commissioner Taylor?
Yes.
Commissioner Marshall?
Yes.
Commissioner Gower?
Yes.
And Commissioner Belto?
Yes.
And Commissioner Johnson, I also vote yes. So this is the point in the meeting where we all get up and switch chairs. Michelle moves all the signed placards around, and the gavel gets ceremoniously handed over to Commissioner Taylor. So with that, I will let Commissioner Taylor take over the meeting, and I'm going to put myself on mute.
When did we say thank you to you for your service?
Hey, I'm still on the commission, so apparently I'm still serving. But thank you.
Okay, so we don't have any minutes, and that moves us to item number 5, public hearings. Any person who has chosen to provide his or her public comment when a public hearing is heard will need to so indicate with the request to speak form provided to the secretary. Items 5.1 and 5.2 have been pulled, which leads us to item 5.3, LBC 20-00055 Cordova Master Plan and Zoning Map Amendment. And I believe we have a presentation from the applicant.
Just one moment. Bringing him in.
Good evening. Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, just one moment. Mike, if you'd like to.
I'm not sure if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear
We
you.
can hear you.
Okay. Good evening. For the record, Mike Raley with Christie Corporation, representing the Cordova family. I'm going to share my screen and go through a quick PowerPoint with you, and then we'll be available for questions afterwards. Let me just get this going. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Great. So the project site this is a project located just south of Crystal Park Road, east of the Truckee River, west of Quilcy Ranch Road, out in the Verdi area. If you look at the parcel that's highlighted, just to the west is the Truckee River, and then there's the Truckee, or a canal operated by Tumwater just to the east of the site. We're requesting that the 11.23 acre site, a master plan amendment from suburban mixed use to large lot neighborhood, and a zone change from community commercial, CC, to LLR1, which is 1 unit per acre. This is the existing site conditions. As you will see, access is fairly limited. It's from an existing dirt road that's an easement that actually cuts through the existing storage yard that connects up to Crystal Park Road. There's a lot of heavy brush and vegetation on the side, as well as some wetlands along the Truckee River. This is the existing master plan, and as you'll see, our site is zoned, designated suburban mixed use with large lot residential to the south, directly to the south, which includes the existing homes. And then if you look at the existing residential designations in the area, large lot residential is the predominant residential category. We're proposing to directly match that of the parcels to the south. So all 11.23 acres would be large lot residential. And then the zoning essentially mirrors the master plan amendment request. The image on the left shows the existing zoning of community commercial. We're proposing to go to LLR1, which directly matches properties to the south, and we feel is complementary to the existing homes in the area. I think it's important to note that this is a significant down zone over the current community commercial zoning. The potential unit yield will be 11 single-family homes under the LLR1 designation. However, with the current septic regulations and the current infrastructure, I did speak with Wes Rubio at the health department. He indicated that 5-acre parcels would be the minimum at this time for a septic system. So it really limits it to a total unit yield of 2 under the current conditions. Now, if sewer was to be extended in the future, then additional subdivision would be permitted with a tentative map, which would come back before this board. I also think it's important to note that the site constraints themselves, which include a significant amount of wetlands, would further preclude subdivision of the property into those 11 units. Once again, compared to the current CC zoning, this is far less intense. It's very low intensity, where the current zoning would allow for commercial centers and multifamily development. If you take just even a standard 20% coverage for commercial, it reduces the traffic impact by up to 99% with what's being proposed. So we think what's being proposed is really much more consistent with the rural character of the area. It matches the adjoining zoning, and really this is being done, just to give you some background. The Cordova family purchased this property in 2019. They were aware of the wetlands on site, and there's some fill that was placed on site that is basically not permitted because it was done within the wetland areas. Mr. Cordova is an environmental and civil engineer, so he was aware of that going in. He's commissioned an environmental firm to go in and do a complete evaluation of the wetlands and the fill, and submitted his building plans for a single-family home along with a remediation plan for the fill, and then found out that he needed a zone change before he could build a house. Community commercial actually allows for attached single-family, so townhomes, duplexes, that sort of thing, but does not allow for detached single-family homes. So that's where we're at today. We're requesting these changes so that the Cordova family can build a custom home on the site. And as part of that construction of the custom home, the fill issue will be fully remediated and the wetlands will be protected. So with that, I will wrap up my presentation, and I'm available to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Michelle. Do we have a presentation from staff?
Yes, just one moment. Brooke, are you ready to go? Brooke, can you hear us? Stand by for just one moment. Brooke, do you have your presentation, or do we need to bring it up for you? I'm not sure what's going on. I am waiting for Brooke to respond to my message. like he's having difficulties, so it'll just be another moment.
Thank you for your patience, everyone. Brooke?
Good evening.
Good evening, Planning Commission and Chair. This is Brooke Oswald, Associate Planner for the record. The case before you tonight is the Cordova Master Plan and Zoning Map Amendment. 3 emails were received on this. Those were all forwarded to the Planning Commission, and you should have those. Main concerns on those, they were all very similar in nature, were the existing wetlands on site, the habitat access, and other environmental concerns. Next slide, please. As was detailed by the applicant's representative, the site is located at the western portion of the city of Reno. It is bordered both on the west by the Truckee River, on the east by a canal, a constrained site. And as you can see from the north, the access is from the north as detailed by the applicant's representative, an unimproved roadway. That unimproved roadway also services the properties to the south. Next slide, please. Once again, that zoning is for community commercial to a large lot, 1 acre per dwelling unit zoning. It should be noted in that community commercial, multifamily is allowed in that area with no limit set on density, but a site plan review with over 4 units. Additionally, attached dwelling units are allowed within that zone. But the single-family detached unit is not allowed within our community commercial. The large lot does allow for single-family development, detached development on 1 acre lots minimum. Additionally, clustered development is allowed through a special use permit, and zero lot line development is allowed. So there are many configurations that may also be used on that large lot property to work to that 11 units. The conforming master plan to that is a suburban mixed-use large lot neighborhood. As was stated, the applicant has proposed to voluntarily reduce their overall development intensity on the site. Next slide, please. This is just detailing side by side both the master plan and the large lot development. As you can see, there's consistency within that suburban mixed-use area, but in the same consistency as that large lot, or this is the master plan side by side, the large lot neighborhood development. So we're seeing that consistently to the south. And then actually, if you go across the river and there is county property, that is a similar sort of large lot residential detached zoning to the south of the property site across the Truckee River. Next slide, please, or slide, please. So looking at that overall master plan policy, the responsible and well-managed growth, there are limited services, as was detailed in the staff report out there. Once again, the maximum homes that could be built out there are 11. We would anticipate with site constraints and other constraints that would be less. The safety, health, and inclusive community, servicing those large, those units, we would, with any development, we'd anticipate through fire that we would see improvements. What we have seen in that area in the past is that they would require all units to be sprinkled, and then those roadways and access points would have to be improved to 20 feet to access emergency vehicles. And then finally, those quality places and outdoor recreation opportunities. By maintaining those environmental features on that site, the wetlands, much of the native habitat, and then the other recreational opportunities provided along the Truckee River there. Next slide, please. This is a side-by-side of the zoning. Once again, looking at that consistency of the zoning, both what is current there and what is being proposed. It is matching, once again, those properties to the south. Next slide, please. So with the city, as we look at this is for a zoning map and a master plan amendment. Just want to reiterate that there would be several more permitting processes that would occur if this is approved and a development was to move forward. So if we were to see over 4 lots that being subdivided, we would see a parcel map. Under 4, we would see a parcel map. We could see a tentative map. We could see that special use permit for that cluster development. Grading permits, site improvement permits, building permits, all still need to happen. Washoe County would be working with them on the well water and the septic system. And then the other agencies that will be involved, because it is along that Truckee River watershed, potentially the Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Nevada Division of Wildlife, Nevada Division of Environmental Protection, Nevada Division of State Lands, and the Truckee Water Conservancy District. So as development occurs, what we would anticipate from a staff level is that we would see overall improvement of wetlands and habitat and environmental system within that area. Next slide, please. So this commission will make a recommendation to City Council this evening, and then City Council is scheduled to hear the proposed amendments on July 22nd, 2020. With that, staff can make all applicable findings and does recommend approval of the project this evening. I'm available for questions as needed.
Thank you, Brooke. Okay, this is a public hearing, so I'm going to ask commissioners for disclosures, and I'll start with Mr. Olivas. You're on mute. Paul, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I unmuted my phone, but not the computer. Where was I? Commissioner Olivas, I received emails and I spoke with the applicant's representative, and I'm familiar with the site.
Thank you. Commissioner Marshall?
No disclosures.
Commissioner Johnson?
I received the emails, I spoke with the applicant's representative, and corresponded via email with a couple of the people who reached out to us.
Commissioner Gower?
Commissioner Gower, I received and read the emails, spoke with the applicant's representative, and have visited the site previously.
Thank you. And Commissioner Velto?
The same as Commissioner Gower.
Commissioner Taylor, I visited the site, received emails, talked to the representative's applicant. Michelle, do we have public comment?
Yes, I received a
item?
request to speak from John Jackson. Can you hear us?
Looks like he's muted.
John, can you
There
hear
we
us?
go. Can you hear me?
Yes, you have 3 minutes to, for your public comment.
Okay, thank you so much. John Jackson here for the record. I live at 520 Crystal Park Road at the south end of the Cordova project. I did send an email with some of my concerns on this project, and I appreciate them being considered. I realize this is just a master plan amendment and a zoning change, and I agree that this parcel is more suitable for residential versus commercial. However, I've seen this land damaged back in the past, in 2011, when approximately 3,000 tons of contaminated material were dumped here. And that's great to hear Mr. Cordova has a remediation plan and wants to protect the wetlands. In an email I sent, there is a wetlands map attached and correspondence from the NDEP and the Army Corps of Engineers with orders to restore the wetlands. And this included fill piles and areas of contaminated fill that were spread out over the property to make roads and level the site. And, you know, currently it appears there's already been a well drilled, and it looks like some building prep in the northwest corner of the site, which was the first area that was ordered to be removed and restored. So this doesn't really parallel the remediation orders from the Army Corps or NDEP. And it, you know, to me, doesn't really seem like the proper restoration plan if it's just being built on top of. So, I mean, I love this area. I love this land. It's a really sensitive ecosystem. I'd like to see proper procedures taking place when developing here, including a wetlands delineation and having as much of these natural resources protected. And to me, the first step before anything happens would be removing this contaminated fill and restoring the wetlands as was ordered back to native grade soil. I don't feel this site will accommodate 11 houses because of the wetlands and the lack of sewer or water provided, also the access. I'm really concerned about fire safety on this non-maintained dirt road. I'm at the end of it, so I'm gonna have to pass through all of this every day. The road builds potholes every winter, and I do think that driving directly through the center of Crystal Park storage is a fire hazard with many of these old vehicles. I've seen a lot higher speeds with you know, new people coming into the area, and there's a hill you have to go up coming out of my house right before you reach the storage yard. The road's narrow, and you know, if the timing's unfortunate, when somebody's going so fast down the other side, there could be a bad accident. So you know, I think it's better to have something residential in this area. It's beautiful as long as it gets protected. And my suggestion would be to change it to large lot residential 2.5 acres, just to preserve it a little bit more, and moving the easement to the east outside of the storage yard along the canal.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. We appreciate your time. Your 3 minutes is up.
Thank you. I don't have any other.
Okay, Michelle, do we have any other requests to speak forms?
No,
Sorry.
that was it.
Okay, we're going to close public comment and bring it back to the commissioners for questions. As a previous man would say, who's going to start us off?
Hey, I can start off now.
Commissioner Johnson, would you like to kick us off?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess just to follow up on some of the things that we heard in the presentation and from public comment. So, Brooke, just to make sure I'm understanding, you mentioned in that if there's any more than 4 units developed on here, there would be a tentative map process to do this. What's the process if it is just a single-family home with respect to any kind of, I guess, what's the city review requirements if there's just a single-family residence placed here?
Yes, so as a single family coming in, that would be under a building permit. There may be site improvement permits. Obviously, our engineering, because of the proximity to the Truckee River, the other agencies will be notified that I outlined within my presentation. Of course, we'll have fire review that will be reviewing the site, as I mentioned before, and working in on some of the parcels in close proximity to this. Our fire is requiring a minimum of 20 feet paved or accessible access, so that could be a compacted subgrade, or we have seen compacted subgrade meet that standard in the past. Additionally, any of the units would be sprinkled in that area. That area is in the WUI or wildland interface, and so fire department will be taking a very strong look at what is built there and their access and their ability to service that area.
Okay, thanks. And then I guess the follow-up to that, just to make sure I understand, since it's not an actual development project right now, we're just looking at the zoning. So there was a mention of potentially a different version of the large lot zoning. We're looking at changing it to a large lot 1 acre. Is that due to any particular reason why 1 acre was the one that the city preferred, or is there a different version or a reason why, as suggested, there wouldn't possibly be a 2.5?
Certainly. So the 1 acre was what was proposed by the applicant, and so we reviewed it under that. As it was shown in the zoning map, there is a consistency within that LL1. All the properties to the south of this are zoned to that LL1, and then we're seeing those properties to the west, just up above the canal there, also that LL1, so we're looking at that consistency. This is sort of there is an interface area there, but there is also, some existing development through the county and a little bit more intensity there. We're often seeing those 2.5s out in more rural areas or out against more rural or undeveloped county land. So staff, in looking at this, found that it was appropriate that LL1 provided the environmental sort of protection, which we often associate with that LL1, or agricultural protection in that. And found that the 1 acre to be sufficient to do that in that area.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair, no further questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Commissioner Marshall, did you have your hand up?
I did. Brooke, I maybe was not paying super close attention when you were talking about a voluntary agreement with the applicant. I think you had a little thing on your slide.
Certainly, not a voluntary agreement. So we often do not see a owner of a property coming into what would be considered a down zoning. So they are allowed, within that community commercial, they're allowed a number of commercial uses, multifamily uses, much
Okay.
more intense uses. And so they're saying, we'd rather down zone, and we often don't see that down zoning.
Right, got it. Okay. Do we, I'm looking at your proposed finding for L, or the justification to make finding L, which is the adequate supply of housing for community and community development for affordable housing. This is losing 11 acres of CC with multifamily possibilities. And and the finding here is based on lack of availability of infrastructure and limited availability of services currently at the site. Is there not, though, development proposed, in relatively near proximity up the, I can't remember now the name of the development that went through us and up to the city council, but is also what is slated out there? We anticipated any development out there that would make facilities and infrastructure more available in the near future?
So Meridian, the service entry off of Meridian is fair ways from where this project site is. Also, we're seeing those environmental constraints as far as wetlands and some of those other things on this site that we look at as far as that intensity near those very delicate environmental systems, so both the Truckee River and those wetlands. And so looking at that overall intensity, that no services being there, currently we don't have sewer or water, that this lower impact development along this sort of constrained, both access constrained and environmentally constrained area was appropriate for that housing there. That CC and suburban mixed use was coming, I think, at a different time when we were looking at that area, a lot more intensity and growth in that area. That's now being serviced through a lot of our infill development and some of our other projects that are closer to the core of the city of Reno, that have adequate infrastructure and services provided. Yeah.
So, in staff's opinion, the loss of these 11 acres represents a minor or insignificant percentage of available CC and other multifamily zoning within the city?
Correct. Within a near future, the expense of extending the services, any multifamily or anything, we would require that be on city sewer and water, through TUMWA, and the expense to bring those out there would make the development unfeasible financially.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Another question regarding the at-grade crossing. And this was particularly mentioned in the Union Pacific letter, and I'm unfortunately have ridden over those railroad tracks fairly often, but that's not, so we're not anticipating this development coming through that at-grade crossing, or it'll come through, how will it access out of the development?
It'll be, the access to that is to the north of the development through easements through, believe 4 other properties. That goes out onto South Verdi Road, and then you have a choice of which way you can go on South Verdi. So they potentially could be crossing that out at-grade crossing. With that, we're potentially seeing up to 11 homes, minimal traffic, nothing that we would require a traffic report or any significant traffic that should have an impact on that at-grade crossing. And we'd actually anticipate less traffic with the zoning to the large lot residential versus the commercial in that area.
Okay, that's it, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, seeing none, bringing it back to the commission for discussion. Or a motion?
Madam Chair, I'm ready to make a motion if there's no discussion.
Please.
Okay. Based upon compliance with the applicable master plan evaluation criteria and zoning map amendment findings, I move to adopt the amendment to the master plan by resolution and recommend that City Council approve the master plan and zoning map amendments as they meet all applicable statutory and code requirements, subject to conformance by Truckee Meadows Regional Planning.
Thank you, Commissioner Gower. Do we have a second?
Commissioner Olivas, I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Do we have any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 All those opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Good luck with your project.
Thank you.
To
Just-
5.4, case number TXT T200006, development agreement request has been made to amend the Reno Municipal Code, Title 18, specifically Chapter 18.2, Development Agreement. This request is associated with a Title 18 code update, renovation, and will propose revised text intended to facilitate the use of voluntary agreements as allowed pursuant to NRS 201 through 278.0207 inclusive. And I believe this is Brooke.
Just one moment, we're bringing up his
Again.
presentation.
Thank you.
I am.
Okay, go ahead, Brooke.
Once again, Brooke Oswald, Associate Planning for the record. What is before you tonight is TXT 200006, looking at a text amendment to the Development Agreement section of Reno Municipal Code. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of background, a development agreement, as was stated in the outline that we went through, it is allowed per NRS in 278 specifically. These are voluntary agreements, so the applicant, or they need to be the property owner at that point, can form a voluntary agreement with the city on the development of their land. Specifically, we're looking at section 18.20. This was added to Reno Municipal Code in the early 2000s. A little bit of the history on that. The developer, the Meadow Woods Mall, desired to have a development agreement. The city of Reno did not have a section within their code for that development agreement. The developer hired a third party to assist the city in setting that code. Specifically for that development project, well, not specifically for that development project, but to facilitate that development. Since that development, going back to the early 2000s, the city of Reno has not entered into a development agreement. And it's one of the, in staff's analysis, there are limits set on that development. It needs to be a project of regional significance. It needs to have a special use permit, a PUD, or a SPD, a special planning district associated with that. This makes it very hard and very selective to use this effectively, requiring all of those necessities before you could enter into agreement. There is precedence in many other Nevada municipalities that do not require those specific requirements to enter into agreement. Sparks, who they updated their code in 2015 and have used development agreements moving forward. Las Vegas uses them extensively, and so does the city of Henderson. Next slide, please. So, as you know, the zoning code renovation is moving forward with COVID. That has been delayed, and we're looking at hopefully it being adopted in the late fall of 2020, looking more towards Christmas area or latter part of December. City Council did ask to bring forward sections of the renovation or Title 18 update for approval in small sections so we can continue to move that forward. This was one of the items that was initiated, a text item that was initiated. As with this proposed text amendment, it's really been written to integrate within the Title 18 update and not just a text amendment. So we are seeing where we'll often just see small changes within the development agreement. As was shown in the staff report, we're seeing sort of an overhaul of the entire agreement. And this really will help. Should help to facilitate development opportunities in the interim and to help to kickstart some development in this time of uncertainty. Next slide, please. So what is proposed within that text amendment? We have enhanced reference to the NRS requirements. And so we've really, within that, we aren't just quoting the NRS requirements, we're basically referring to those sections that enable this to happen. And we're letting NRS sort of set a lot of the flexibility of how this development agreement can move forward, and the state setting the rules on how development can move forward. We're removing the regional project of regional significant requirements and the discretionary permits. And we're also removing a lot of the text that's redundant in our NRS requirements. We have many sections of the current code that are really just restating what is already stated within NRS. And with the removal of those and really referring back to the flexibility allowed within the NRS statute, that should allow for a flexibility and adaptability of this development tool to help facilitate development. Next slide, please. So tonight is, once again, a commission recommendation to City Council, and the proposed text amendment will be heard by City Council on July 22nd, 2020. I am available for questions as needed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Brooke. Commissioners, do we have any disclosures? I don't see any. Michelle, do we have any public comment on this item?
No, we do not.
Thank you. Discussion? Questions? Or let's start with questions, commissioners. Questions, discussion, motion?
We'll give it a shot since everyone is being reticent tonight. Brooke, just first a minor thing, there's some moratorium language that I see that's been deleted. In the section, was that in there by error, or are we lifting a moratorium that is not otherwise lifted, or why is that?
Yeah, in our analysis of that, that was a moratorium that no longer exists and had not been removed. So it's no longer relevant to the section of code.
So there's been some other action that has removed it?
Yeah, from legal did review this, and legal's analysis of it was that it was no longer needed within the code and was legal to move forward.
I guess I have kind of an overarching question that this is a significant change to the code, and it's a major policy. It includes major policy shifts within it. And as we heard, we're basically given a week to look at the language, and then the city council is going to do it, hear it in a couple weeks. This is kind of unlike a process for other provisions of the code, particularly one as critical as this one with development agreements, that this is kind of cranked up to a speed, and we're not doing any workshops. We're not talking about really the policy we're trying to accomplish here. We're just kind of given the language. Why the rush on this, and why not proceed with a little deliberation? And it's kind of reminding me of the code language for the skywalk. Is there a project out there that's generating this push rather than an actual good planning process?
Well, I think as we're seeing development, there's several places where this could be used. There is no specific project linked to this development agreement. We do have a development agreement has been submitted by Jacobs for development over on the west side of downtown. It's basically, we have told them that they don't meet the requirements for that development agreement, but it was not necessarily pushed forward for that reason. We see several potential projects as we develop downtown that this could be used in. Sparks uses them in lieu of a PUD. They set underlying zoning and then use a development agreement to really get those insurances that a PUD would apply. And so we're not as reliant on that PUD tool. As far as the rush, it was put forward by Councilmember Reese, and as staff taking direction, we have brought it forward in a time per council's direction.
Okay. Now, a major change is to the timing of the development agreement. whereas now it can occur either before, after, when unrelated to some of the underlying land use decisions like SUPs and PUDs and specific plans. And as I read this, and I'm just kind of give you my understanding, if you could tell me if I'm right, wrong, or how it might work out. But since the development agreement can basically include a full range of commitments on behalf of the city, that if it's executed before some of these underlying land use decisions, that and the development agreement doesn't go to the planning commission, it goes straight to the city council, that agreement could significantly constrain the planning commission's discretion when some, an eventual SUP, PUD, or other actual entitlement comes before us. Is that an accurate assessment?
I could see the potential that it could impede a decision made by city council, could impede the decision of the planning commission. The moving that way to allow for development agreements prior to another entitlement is in many areas of town, specifically the downtown and our mixed use downtown Reno Regional Center. Many things go straight to permit. This is a tool that can be used if it was linked to a potential abandonment that council would see. So I think what we would anticipate seeing with these development agreements is a link, if there is another entitlement or request, we would see them linked with that request because they would support that request. So if it was a zoning, and oftentimes we hear there's a project for that zoning and we move forward with that zoning, but that project never transpires and now we have a zoning, right? That's why we always have to look if the zoning is actually appropriate and not the project. The development agreement could, revert that zoning back, or in an abandonment situation, a development agreement could revert a abandonment in the future or allow the city to buy that property if within that time, which is a requirement of a development agreement, if the developer did not act within that time, the city could revert some of those prior decisions. And that's largely why it can be linked to that entitlement. But once again, that downtown, we may see development that does not require an entitlement. And we did not want to hinder that you basically had to have an entitlement or some other discretionary review to move forward with a development agreement. They are voluntary, and so both parties have to agree to that. And we felt that was a comfort level from a council.
That's a yes, then.
Yes, you could potentially see that it could hinder a planning commission. There are two, per NRS, there are two findings that a city council has to make. That is that it meets the requirement of NRS and it meets the requirement of state law. So, and that NRS being that it needs to meet the intent of the master plan.
Thanks, Brooke.
Mm-hmm.
This may be more of a point for Carl. In the rush to, looks like, draft up this language, I really think using for public hearings, I would use the language out of the old language for 1820.202C2, rather than what's in there under development agreements do not have a regulatory timeline for a hearing date. I just think that's cleaner. I'll take the remainder of my comments for discussion. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Marshall. Other questions?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Johnson.
Commissioner Johnson?
Thank you. Brooke, just, I appreciate the kind of the line of discussion that Commissioner Marshall was going on, or questioning. I'm just trying to understand a little bit better as far as how this works, because if I'm understanding this is a voluntary thing that can be done, and in theory, is the idea that a property owner wants to do some type of development on their parcel, and they would want to enter into a development agreement. Is it due to wanting more certainty that the city is going to approve what they're actually planning to do, as opposed to going through some of the entitlement process and the way that things are set up right now? Because I'm trying to understand what the, why the development agreement now has taken on such priority from council. Is it, where's the rationale for when this type of thing would want to happen, in lieu of the existing processes that are in place?
And this does not take away any existing process. So a development agreement cannot, if a requirement for an SUP or that, this does not take that requirement away. Those are still required per the, a development agreement is just an additional, so if there's terms, and oftentimes what it is should be a mutual agreement, where the developer may want something or something is asking for something to be slightly different from the city, and the city in turn is looking, we potentially could be looking for offsite improvements because of the development and some of those things, which are hard to link in a project that doesn't have sort of an SUP or PUD or something associated with. And so, but the city is still seeing a large impact from that development coming in. And so it gives a certainty to both the developer of what how the city will move forward, and it gives a confidence or security to the city in that if those terms are not met, there's recourse through mediation or other options.
Okay, and I guess the follow-up to that, you said that there hasn't been any of these in the city of Reno since, what was it, 2000, in the 2000s?
Yeah, nearly 20 years. We cannot find a record that, we've had other agreements as we've sold property and different things, but specifically through the development agreement, we have not entered into a development agreement we've entered into one that we can find, which is the Meadowwood Mall, which was asked by that applicant to develop, so.
Okay. And then I guess finally along those lines, if I can kind of remember where I was, the idea of this development agreement is going to be negotiated between, I'm assuming, city staff and legal, with the potential property owner. And then that development agreement with whatever city input, whether it's city manager or city council, the process for the review of the development agreement, if I understand it, it's just a presentation and discussion in a public hearing at city council. That's the only time that this would be reviewed after it's already been put into place? There's no requirement for the development agreement to be reviewed in any other public workshop or public meeting. There's no requirement for that either in this or through NRS.
Correct. There is no requirement. As it's currently written, it would be initiated by the applicant. Staff would determine if it was appropriate, and then would reviewed at staff level through all the appropriate departments. So, be it engineering, firing, city manager, everyone, to make the determination if it, if we supported it or not supported it, because it is voluntary. I think any agreement that eventually made it to city council would be supported by staff for that reason. But there is no a requirement for a previous discretionary review. The city of Sparks requires that the Planning Commission review the agreement for compliance to the master plan, and the city of Las Vegas is also similar in that nature, where they have their planning commission review that for conformance to the master plan prior to going to the city council.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I guess just the one last question, and I was looking at the actual text that was put in, and kind of where I'm going with this is that in the chapter 1820, the revisions that you're putting in Title 18, there is a requirement, and I can appreciate where it talks about all the procedures and requirements of Title 18 apply to the development of the property that is subject of a development agreement, but it has two conditions where that's not the case. One is as otherwise provided in NRS, and the other is or in a development agreement entered into. So I guess my question in reading that is, it appears that there is something in the article about the development agreement that would allow you to put into the development agreement something that allows you to not follow the procedures of Title 18.
Correct. So if that agreement is entered into prior to Title 18 being changed, and you're still within that development, you're not subject to that change. You potentially, a development agreement could lock in that at a period of time, for a period of time. It can't lock it in indefinitely. So it, as I understand it, and if that development agreement goes away through either the city or it being pulled, it would revert back to obviously the underlying Title 18. But you can't avoid current code by a development agreement. What you can is compliance if code was to change and you were still within the development agreement timeline. You may or may not, depending on the terms of the development agreement, be subject to that change.
Okay. I'm not sure I interpret it quite the same way, but I get your response on that. So, okay, thank you. That answers my questions, Madam Chair. Nothing further until discussion.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Other questions? Brooke, I have a quick question. Was, Commissioner Marshall talked a little bit about a workshop or getting public input on this. What was done to help facilitate that public input and comment for this?
Certainly, it is a challenging time to gather public input. We reached out to the NABs and sent the NABs that we were updating. We requested any comments or anything that they have. We've also posted on the city website. The text amendment has been posted on the community development website to help to make the community aware that this is something that is moving forward. So, and then as we, obviously for this, it was on an agenda, and then on the, as this is before the city council, we will see this text amendment being posted in the paper.
Okay, and then council is supportive of this idea. Is that correct?
It was there was a motion made by Commissioner or City Councilperson Reese, and it was voted upon, and the motion passed. So council was supportive of this text amendment.
Yeah, I think there was maybe just one council person that wasn't supportive of it, if I read that right.
Correct. I believe there was. So City Councilperson Jenny Breckus voted nay to the motion, and the other 6 voted in favor.
Okay. Okay, shall we have some discussion, commissioners?
I had another question, if you wouldn't mind.
Please.
Brooke, but the language, this was just to initiate the code language. Was the language in front of the city council at the time?
No, it was not. It was just, it was to move forward to make changes to the, or make a text amendment, so.
And was there any direction as to whether or not it should, the development agreement like in Sparks and in the city of Las Vegas go before the planning commission? Did you receive any direction from that from the city council?
The city council did not make direction to that. They just initiated the text amendment to that section.
So this was staff's recommendation to conduct it in this manner?
So this was, yeah, this was a move through staff to move per the text amendment that you have in front of you.
And why not follow Sparks and city of Las Vegas?
Hi, for the record, Angela Foose, Acting Community Development Director. For this text amendment, the initiation initially came from council. This first step is to go to Planning Commission. So we tried to look at what NRS specifically requires and follow NRS. We looked at other jurisdiction as to how they use development agreements and why they use development agreements. I wanted to maybe give you a couple examples of where this has come up so that you have a better kind of context. For the city of Reno, we've been doing a lot of road abandonments, and abandonments don't go to Planning Commission, they only go to City Council. Some of the concerns we've heard from council is what happens if the proposed development doesn't move forward and council has approved abandonment of a road and a project never moves forward. And so there's been a lot of discussions about, can they put in some kind of, as we call it, kind of clawback rule that says, we will approve this road abandonment, understanding that if the project or a project doesn't move forward, we get the road abandonment back. That there's not really a mechanism to do that, right? Because once you abandon a road, it's abandoned, it's gone. A development agreement, however, would provide a tool that there could be more of a contractual agreement between a developer and the city. So that agreement, for example, could say, if a project didn't move forward, that abandonment would not be recorded. So that's an example of something that we've heard both from a couple developers who are looking at development in the downtown area in particular, and some concerns we've heard by council. Again, right now, we don't really have the tool to take back a road that's been abandoned, but if you had a contractual agreement, a development agreement to go with it, that would give you the ability to kind of set some different parameters that we don't currently have. Another example that we've had recently is on existing buildings, and again, in our downtown area in particular, because we've had a lot of interest in our downtown area, especially with that initiative by council for the 1,000 Homes initiative. We have some buildings that are existing, and we've had an interest in developers coming in and changing the use. Changing a use from a hotel, for example, to a condominium or apartment project is one example. If they changed a use from an existing hotel to an apartment project, there would be no entitlement. There's no special use permit, there's no tentative map, it goes straight to building permit. So there's nothing that Planning Commission or council can do to, or even staff can do to condition that project to do anything. When we run into situations where maybe we don't have the public services, such as maybe we don't have fire service. Again, we don't have the ability to condition these projects that go straight to a building permit. So if we had a development agreement in place, that is something that would give the city council some assurity of what would be connected to that project. Because we can't do that at the time of a building permit. We can't just condition a project without meeting code. It limits our ability to do things. So there's pros and cons to this, both from the developer side and from the city side, because the developer then has to agree to those agreements. City council also has to agree to that. There are review times as well. So every 2 years, it's set up as part of a development agreement that's drafted. Every 2 years, that development agreement goes back to City Council for review. If there's something that's changed with the project, maybe it's only halfway built and the developer has, changed how they want to do their phasing, Initially, if they would only trigger a building permit, planning commission wouldn't see it, city council wouldn't see it, but because they have that development agreement attached to it, they would have to go back to city council, reopen that development agreement and ask to make those changes. So there's definitely pros and cons, both from the developer side and from city council side, because it gives both parties a little bit more security, and I would say, and more opportunity as well, to get some of those things that maybe we wouldn't be able to get because there would be no entitlement that otherwise would allow us to get some of these extra conditions or things that we wouldn't get at the time of building permit. So again,
So we could,
go ahead.
thank you. So for road abandonments, we could easily do a carve out for road abandonment. For existing buildings, and if there's a problem that it goes straight to development, then we should probably, and there's not services, we should probably look at that in a planning sense and look at the appropriate level of, you know, whether or not it's triggering additional service requirements for that action. It doesn't seem like the way to do that is to gut the existing development agreement standards and just say, let's just do it via development agreement. So I guess it's almost, to me, it's like taking a sledge to a problem that might be better used with a scalpel. But so it seems like there's something else that's motivating this, because those two things could have been, you know, easily worked through with minor changes. Sorry, Commissioner, or Chairwoman, I'm launching into discussion, so I'll stop and allow any other questions to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Marshall. Are there other questions?
Madam Chair, just a quick follow-up question. Angela, what would be the incentive for someone who has a property who wants to develop it, who can go write the building permit to enter into an agreement? Wouldn't there have to be something that the city would offer that they would want to incentivize them to enter into that agreement?
And that's a great question. I'm going to go back to the abandonment as a good example. Again, we have a number of projects that could go straight to building permit now. Let's say that they would like to do an alley abandonment or a road abandonment in order to make their project work. However, council is not comfortable abandoning that alley or that road unless they know that project is going to move forward. So that developer would apply for a road abandonment or an alley abandonment, and the city council then has the choice to say, I support a project coming forward. However, a project doesn't require an entitlement. So I'm not comfortable approving a road abandonment unless a project actually moves forward. So from the developer side, they can then come forward and say, have a project, go straight to building permit, however, it crosses an alley. So in order for me to build my entire building, I need that alley to be abandoned. City council, if you're not comfortable abandoning the alley unless you know for sure that this building, this podium, let's say building, is going to be built, then maybe that developer says, I'm comfortable moving forward with the development agreement so that you know if for some reason, finances fall out, my project doesn't move forward, that alley is not abandoned. So it gives the developer a little bit more ability to work with city council and give council the assurity that that project will move forward. You know, as you know, at the time of special use permit and tentative map, that's the preliminary stage. And a lot of these projects never make it to final design for various reasons. When a project is coming forward and wants to go to building permit, they're not going to go forward with their building permit unless they know that that alley can be abandoned, right? Their project just won't work unless it can be abandoned. So in that example, it gives both parties a little bit more assurance that, yep, city council, if you like this project, again, that you're not looking at a project, you're only looking at abandonment, but it's tied to an agreement that assures council that if that project for whatever reason falls through and doesn't move forward, that alley abandonment won't be recorded and doesn't have to happen. Another place we've seen it, again, in other jurisdictions, is timing on tentative maps. Arrow Creek is a good example. So years ago, Washoe County approved Arrow Creek, and there was a development agreement associated with that had specifics on timing. So it was timing of when different phases of a tentative map could move forward, and allowed them greater timelines between final map phases. I've seen development agreements in Sparks also work that way. So you can do things that gives, the developer different kinds of mechanisms to make their project work if they know they have a longer time frame. We've also seen it with infrastructure. Sparks uses development agreements when they have a lot of infrastructure tied to a development. Maybe the project only comes forward with a tentative map. It's not a PUD, so it's harder to condition projects to trigger, at the time of the 200th unit, we need to know that that traffic light's going to be installed, or that sewer line's going to be expanded. So those are the kind of reasons we see other jurisdictions using development agreements.
And the current language in there wouldn't allow for that to happen.
The challenge we have now with the current language is that you have to have an entitlement to go with it. And again, the downtown projects are a great example, and it frankly hasn't really been such a big issue until recently, when we've seen a lot more interest in the downtown area, and almost everything in downtown can go straight to building permit. If it is a condo project, it would require a tentative map. But if it's an apartment project or some kind of mixed use, most of those projects go straight to building permit and don't require any kind of special use permit or variance or tentative map.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Discussion on this item now.
And let me just
Any
also
commissioners
follow
have
up. This is a text amendment, and so we are looking for planning commissioners' input. And this doesn't mean you have to recommend approval or denial. This is also an opportunity for you guys to say, you know what, we would like planning commission to have input on development agreements, or you want to change something in the language that's been drafted. So this is definitely the opportunity where we are looking for your guys' input, and we'll take that to council.
Madam Chair. Go ahead.
No, my apologies, Commissioner Gower, you go.
Commissioner Velto, you've been quiet. Please.
Sure. I don't have too many comments, I think, on this text amendment. When I'm looking at the text amendment, I guess I come to it from this perspective that the council initiated the text amendment and has set the general terms that they'd like to increase some predictability and security in the way that developers engage the city. I think that these partnerships through development agreements are helpful when we're trying to plan and allow for the city to give developers some stability when otherwise they would need to have an entitlement in order to have the agreement in the first place. So it seems to make sense to me. I understand the hesitation with kind of taking away input from the Planning Commission. I don't think that's something that we should try to cling to in terms of clinging to jurisdiction over having say if the council determines that they would not like for us to have say, or if it allows for there to be better projects in the future. So that's kind of my input on this, and I'm interested in hearing what the other commissioners have to say.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I take a little bit different stance on that. I think that following a little bit of the model of what Sparks and some of the Southern Nevada jurisdictions are doing, and not necessarily, jurisdictional thing with Planning Commission or turf or anything like that. It's just an opportunity for the Planning Commission to provide, I guess, an additional, level of expertise to the agreement, something that, council may benefit from. And in fact, that's why the Planning Commission is here, is to provide that, that input. And it would relate to future development. So it would seem to make sense that a recommendation from us on something like this would be a valuable addition to the process. So I would be in favor of adding in a planning commission review and recommendation to city council.
Thank you, Commissioner Gower. Other discussion?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Johnson, I definitely appreciate what Commissioner Gower is saying. I guess not everything, at least in the examples that Angela provided to us, we've asked previously about involvement in abandonments, street abandonments, and there wasn't a lot of appetite at the council level for that for whatever reason. But I think in this scenario, it sort of shows where, you know, our involvement and our, I guess, commentary and suggestions would be helpful. I think maybe my bigger concern with this is that, you know, to me, it's kind of setting up, on one hand, the examples that were provided are great in terms of giving the city an opportunity to weigh in and perhaps get things that are a benefit to them or to us as a city from a development project. But I don't think that those examples that are provided are just the only ones that we're going to get. I mean, I think when you look at what this allows for, it really is kind of creating an opportunity for, in my mind, and maybe it is and maybe it isn't. I guess I'm not sure, but it just seems like there's an opportunity in terms of the way this is written to kind of push developments forward with less community input and maybe less oversight, which is something that, you know, I have some concerns with. I mean, I think it seems like there's a lot of things that can be put in place at the, you know, the behest of the developer or with discussions with staff, and that then goes to council. Council looks at it based on recommendations from staff, and the input opportunities are limited. And I think on projects such as abandonments of streets or taking over of alleyways or anything that's even in, whether it's in the downtown area, outside the downtown area, it just seems like this is an opportunity, rightly or wrongly, to create a situation where there's maybe less oversight in terms of what we're doing. So that's a concern of mine. And I guess the second concern of mine is kind of going back to the very initial question that Commissioner Marshall asked, which is, you know, the carving of this out from the overall Title 18 process. To do this as a separate item based on, you know, some things that may or may not be happening. You know, there's a whole process in place for the Title 18 update. And granted, it's been slowed by what's going on, but, you know, there's a number of committees that are involved in looking at that. There's a number of people with even more experience with the different opportunities that this would open up than even what we're thinking here in this meeting. So to kind of separate this out, handle it independently and push it forward without the benefit of the rest of the Title 18 process is really concerning to me, especially since, you know, we're you know, ostensibly doing this because council is, you know, yes, they've presented it to us, but, you know, I'm not sure why they're presenting something to us that hasn't been implemented in 20 years and is based on, you know, a couple of things that, as Commissioner Marshall indicated, could probably be addressed not through a full wholesale update to this section of Title 18, but with some more specific carved out agreements. So I think fundamentally, like has come up on previous text amendments that have come before us, we're separating those out from the overall process for reasons that are somewhat unclear to me or are done for specific projects that perhaps, would do with a level of scrutiny that this is going to eliminate. So those are my concerns, my points, hopefully in response to some of the other items that have come up. So thank you, Madam Chair.
My thoughts, it brings predictability to the process, and in some of the recent text amendments, it hasn't been a clear path. We can make recommendations to council, and then they're not necessarily accepted or listened to. So to just be very blunt, it almost seems like sometimes a wasted time, and I don't think we're taking away a process or a public process, because I think people and the public will still have plenty of time to comment on the text amendments or the projects or the developments. It seems like we're doing exactly what we've been directed to do, to bring some predictability to the process. And I'm not sure that, I guess, I don't know if we are taking out a layer of accountability with this text amendment, but those are my opinions. Commissioner Olivas, did you have a question or comment?
Nothing specific. I'm good.
I guess I have a question, or I guess a comment to any of the commissioners, really. Is kind of, what would you like the process to be, and do you have any suggestions to change the amendment to make it so there's more input? There can still be input from the commission while trying to achieve the goal that staff has set out. And I know I just want to hear your thoughts on that.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Johnson, I'll respond to it real quick before Commissioner Marshall does. I guess the concern that I have is maybe less specific to this text amendment per se, because I think my concern is that I just don't understand well enough how it's envisioned to be implemented, either directed by city onto a developer or the developer onto the city. My concern is that we're being asked to carve something out from what is an already established overall process to update Title 18, and for reasons that don't seem to be of any great, priority. If this has been in place in our code for 20 plus years, why now are we being asked to carve it out and do it 3 or 6 months before it would actually be reviewed and vetted by the overall process? So, my concerns, as I indicated, with, the potential issues with this are simply because I just don't think that it's been fully vetted out in terms of what it can mean. We have examples from the city of Sparks and Las Vegas, and I appreciate Angela kind of identifying areas where it could be used here. But I guess I would like to understand much better in terms of how this really impacts the code, and why it's a priority that needs to be looked at ahead of and separately from all of the rest of the items during the Title 18 update.
And if I can jump on the end of that, Madam Chair.
Actually, Commissioner Marshall, Angela, would you like to answer what Commissioner Johnson was saying? I just saw that you jumped in.
Yeah, maybe I can provide just a little bit more input. The zoning code update was planned to, well, we're in July now. I mean, at one point it would have been adopted by now. Through COVID, it's definitely been extended. The latest timeline that we're looking at for adoption is probably December at this point, because we still have to go through a process to have more public input. We have to go back to Planning Commission, we have to go back to City Council, and we're going to take it in chunks. So in the meantime, we have been approached multiple times by multiple different types of developments. And many of these developments would have gone straight to building permit and still will go straight to building permit. And there's elements of these different projects that, again, we don't have the ability to condition. There's concerns on, well, it would benefit both parties if there could be some kind of agreement that would give assurities of timing of when these things were going to happen, and also would give the developer some assurity that yes, they're willing to make these huge investments, understanding that there's give and take. If they're going to put their money into these projects, they want some guarantees that city council will be supportive, or planning commission would be supportive, or if it's a project that maybe has something unique about it. I mean, I can throw out another example, and again, these are things that have just been discussed of things that we could do, opportunities that we could look at. We had a piece of property that was owned by the city of Reno, and somebody approached us and said, what if we put fields, soccer fields, lacrosse fields, baseball fields on this property? It would be something that would be controlled, again, by the city because the city owns it, but a private developer would use it, use the fields, they would make the investment and be able to use those fields on more of a commercial level. Again, we don't really have a mechanism. It doesn't necessarily require a special use permit. How do we put in some requirements that, yes, the city will benefit? And as we all know, we're short on fields. We're also putting in requirements that that developer, he's willing to put in a huge financial investment, but he has to have some guarantees that the city is going to allow him to also use those fields for commercial purposes, right? Meaning he's going to be able to make money on this investment. So that is an example of just a unique project that doesn't really fit anything in our code. And a development agreement would be one tool that we would have the ability to say both parties will have to agree to all the details. We can't do that now because we don't have a development agreement. Again, the other example that we talked about was a hotel, right? I mean, and we all probably know what I'm talking about. An existing hotel that wants to convert to something else. There's only a handful of those left in downtown Reno, but there's a lot of specific details because you have an old hotel, you're dealing with old sewer credits, things that you guys don't get involved in, city council doesn't get involved in, at the staff level we get involved in, but we don't have the tools to even make these decisions about some of these little nuances. And it's something that if we could take those decisions to city council in the form of a development agreement, it would give the developer and the city council more power to work together to come up with an agreement. It's not a one-size-fits-all, and I think that's why I think you're struggling with, you know, where would this be used and why aren't we using them now and why haven't we used them for 20 years? I think it's come to our attention more so now because we have more interest in infill. We have more interest in reusing, again, old buildings for the last 20 years. Not that we haven't had that, but there hasn't been a whole lot of new development in our downtown. So we've had probably 4 to 5 different big development projects approach us on things that they want to do. And again, we don't have the tools to say, it would be great if you could put in a stoplight, but we have nothing to trigger that requires that you put in a stoplight. And they're saying, well, we would happily put in a stoplight, but we also want to know in return, we're going to get X, Y, and Z. So those are the kind of, you know, discussions we're having. But by adding the element of a development agreement, the difference is it does go through a public process. It does go through a city council approval process. So it's not something that would go straight to building permit without somebody reviewing, again, that development agreement. I think from what I'm hearing from Planning Commission is you guys also would like to have some input. And if that's something that you want, again, that's a comment that I think would be if that's the direction I'm hearing, we can forward those comments to council if they want to add that language. Then it's at their discretion to add their language. big picture, the council gets inundated with developers calling them on a regular basis. And when they get the same comments over and over of, it would be great if we had some tools to move these projects forward, then they initiate these text amendments. This was part of the discussion of the zoning code update. Because the zoning code update is taking much longer than anticipated, this just got fast-tracked. And that was a decision that council said is, we are doing our best to help keep development moving forward. What are some more tools in the toolbox that we can implement now rather than waiting another 6 months? So that was at their direction that they asked us to initiate this and move this forward earlier than the zoning code process.
Thank you for that explanation. I was going to follow up on Commissioner Johnson's question of if it's going to happen in 3 months anyway, what's making it happen now, besides the whole update. I appreciate that for my knowledge. Commissioner Marshall, you had a...
Thank you. I think Angela's discussion, this is hopefully getting to another point, Commissioner Beto, really just justifies to me why we need to follow a planning process or the co-development process like what we were using for the Title 18 update. Doesn't, if the city council thinks we need to take out this slice and deal with it, then let's do that. But the process that we're in right now is we are, handed a week or, so less than a week before the meeting to really provide input on these really, I think, critical and important, planning decisions in code. How do we draft code? And what's our input on these code sections? Right now, what the proposal is basically to gut it and maximize discretion of staff and the city council, which I understand that may be the best way to go about it, and just defer entirely to the maximum under the NRS. But why don't we have at least a workshop that we can learn about? All right, how do we use development? How should we respond to these specific instances that seem to be really grouping into distinct categories that we could provide input on? Well, if it really is limited, or the main examples are these, kind of discretionary or non-discretionary building permit situations or abandonment, then there's a way you can deal with that, and you can still preserve what I think are some of the really good aspects of the existing code without jettisoning it all. So that's kind of a process objection to what we're being forced to do right now, which is really, hey, off the cuff, give us your thoughts on a whole new approach to development agreements. Okay, well, take it for what it's worth. The process, I don't believe, is really one that is conducive to productive input. It's just reactive to what you might think in the moment, given that we've had it since last Friday or something. And then the actual content, I think I would, it's not just, being hypersensitive to losing jurisdictional opportunities to get our 2 cents in on development. But I just want to echo Commissioner Johnson and Commissioner Gower's comments. It also provides an opportunity for additional public comment before the discretion is set. So the purpose of the development agreement, which I think Angela has clearly put forward, is really to kind of bind both parties into some conceptual or maybe not so conceptual sideboards. And then when that comes in for various subsequent development approvals, you're operating within those sideboards. And so really you're setting those sideboards and you're limiting the discretion of those of future public comment, really, in terms of what could be possible, and then our ability to try to shape development that we think is better promotes the goals of the master plan. And taken together with what happened with the Sky Bridge, which is really just another example of, well, we have a project that's driving something here, and so we need to get rid of this opportunity for additional input because it's inconvenient. I just object to that, I guess, and maybe I'm being a little too strident, but I find it, a quick fix to something that should be given due consideration and judgment. If they just want to do it, then why even bring it to us, except that they have to by law. But, it's kind of, I don't feel very well liked. Anyway, those are my comments. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Marshall. Commissioner Velko?
Yeah, Commissioner Marshall, I appreciate those comments, and Commissioner Gower, yours as well, Commissioner Johnson. I don't necessarily disagree with kind of the procedural concerns, and I'm still on the fence on this issue. I really like the objective of this reform. It seems like, since we're looking at other examples, this is solving a problem that we see in Verdi, where it's trying to avoid piecemeal planning. And that's where I struggle to see how we can weigh in on things that we don't have control over. If we can't bind the city to, for instance, as Angela pointed out, put in a stoplight or make those types of agreements, those are things that council needs to weigh in on and council needs to commit to. So I don't know what our role would be other than making suggestions for an agreement. If the agreement would require funding or things that we don't have control over, I don't know what that would look like, but I'm not sure. So I guess I struggle to see what that would look like, but I guess at this point it's, I understand that it's a good idea to have more discourse and more public input and allow for another stage in the process like us to weigh in some aspects of development.
Yeah, but let's take, for example, the stoplight issue. That wouldn't come to us. There's no need to come to us on that one. But do you toss out the whole system in order to have that happen? To get a development agreement for, I know it's being somewhat facetious, but for a stoplight, you could with good planning, you could draft code language that really looks at what are the problems we're trying to solve. All right, let's get a good problem statement, so that we hear everything that the city, staff thinks we need more flexibility, or we need the ability to kind of barter with developers on these items, and let's do a planning process around that, figure out what the issues are, get public input on it, and have us craft a solution that where it's not just let's get rid of or cabin in the discretion of the planning commission on some of these larger developments, and because we want the flexibility to get a stoplight, or we want the flexibility to get at these issues that are circumventing, I don't want to say circumvent, they're not coming to council, or not, that are just as of right, kind of approval. So it's that's what I think. I'm not trying to say we need to have a review of all these development agreements. There's probably some sort of middle ground, or that really promotes our core function, which is look at these kind of larger projects, larger planning objectives, master plan amendments, zoning, PUDs, those kind of major development things, and preserve that our ability to provide that input.
I agree with providing the opportunity for people to give input in the community process and the public process. I just, based on some of our previous meetings, some of our previous recommendations that we've provided to council, This was a comment made, I think, by one of our commissioners last time. We're almost holding applicants hostage for the processes that they're forced to go through. And if there's a developer that wants to invest in downtown or wherever, and this is a tool that might help that process, which is something as a city we've said we want to do, it can become quite frustrating, I would imagine, if you're told to go to one commission, you get an answer, and that answer or that recommendation is not consistent with what you're referring it to council, and then you get a different consistency. That's kind of where I'm coming from. I think if, you know, there was a workshop or a planning process that we could recommend to go through before changing this text amendment, or to at least go through that process, that might be helpful. But it's hard to tell a developer, are you okay over there, Angela?
It's like a gnat trying to get in my nose or my eyes.
I thought you were shooing me away.
Sorry, literally there's gnats. I don't know where the gnats are coming from. Sorry.
I just personal, my personal politics is just more levels of bureaucracy for a whole bunch of different efforts isn't good for anybody. The city, the council, the planning commission, so whatever we can do to make it clearer and more predictable within NRS and code, I'm supportive of. And if that's, you know, like Commissioner Marshall said, if you want to propose a workshop or a process that we can take back to council.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Johnson, I appreciate where you're coming from on that. I think the point that we're all kind of, I think, struggling with here is that, you know, this is a pretty substantive change, and it allows for so many things that, you know, Angela can keep bringing more and more examples of how this would be something that would be appropriate. And it's hard to think that there's a catch-all language that covers all of those. And I don't want to, you know, my concern is that this hasn't been reviewed to the level that, you know, necessarily myself or, quite frankly, council should be comfortable with, because of all of the things that it may.
Did you guys lose him? I lost him. There we go.
You might have just cut out.
I think we lost
You're
you,
frozen
Mark.
in your basement.
Hold that thought, Mark. Let's come back to you.
No, I'm good.
Now you're back.
I just wanted to say, yeah, I don't know what happened. I think somebody else must be on the computer in my house. Just the idea that getting this cleaned up enough so that we're all comfortable with what's coming out of it. A workshop idea or something where it's not just, you know, the way this is written now, any kind of development agreement that staff and council are comfortable with gets presented in one public meeting that's noticed 1 week beforehand, and then it moves forward. I just like there to be a little more level of comfort in what's written in this to assure that one meeting is an appropriate level of input, or, you know, that all of the other aspects of Title 18 that don't necessarily mean you have more meetings to go to, but that ensures that the development that we want to have happen in the city can still happen and not be circumvented by a development agreement.
That's a great point. Angela, who writes the text amendments? How does the text amendment language get into the staff reports? Is it Brooke sitting there doing stuff, or does he get some help?
In this case, it was a combination between planning staff and legal staff. And we started with looking at what state law requires. And then we also looked at what some of the other jurisdictions within Nevada require. And so we came up with the proposed language. And again, this is the opportunity for Planning Commission, if there's something that you felt we left out or missed. The intent was to make it match state law as much as possible. The previous development agreement language did not not that it did not follow state law. It had many additional requirements that were outside of state law. And we didn't see where any of the other jurisdictions had those same requirements. And again, they were, I would say, more burdensome on actually making the ability to do development agreements, which is why, again, we haven't seen any in 20 years. So we tried to make it as simplistic as possible to say, what is the minimum requirement? What does state law require? Let's not copy and paste state law. They have to follow it no matter what. Are there things that we need to specify that state law does not specify? And so, again, we kind of took all of that into consideration, and that's how we came up with the draft text amendment.
Madam Chair, can I ask a procedural question? Angela, what happens if we make a recommendation to City Council that we want this to come back as a workshop? Don't they have the discretion to say, well, that's a good suggestion, but we don't really need that?
They do. So from the Planning Commission perspective tonight, you guys are making a recommendation to council. We can forward that information if that's the direction that Planning Commission gives. It's currently scheduled for City Council on July 22nd. And so if at that meeting they agree that they want to remand this back to more of a workshop format, we would then bring it back to another Planning Commission meeting and hold more of a workshop format and then go back to City Council for a first reading.
So, Madam Chair, if I could, Angela, given that feedback, then my suggestion or a motion that I would be prepared to make would be a recommendation for a workshop procedurally. If council is not interested in that, then we've been presented with draft code language. My suggestion would be that we provide recommendations on the draft code language that's been provided, so that input is given to council, not just a motion that we want a workshop. And Madam Chair, I'm ready to make a motion to that effect if you're ready.
I will just add one discussion point. I'm not in need of a workshop. I know there are commissioners that feel that they need a workshop and they would like a workshop, and I support that. I am not in that vote, just.
Commissioner Olivas here. I guess we spent a lot of time talking about that we didn't like the process and wanted a workshop, and I get that, and maybe we should have one, but sometimes when your boss says to do something, you don't get to take the time to do it the way you want it, and we've been told to do it. So I think Peter's suggestion of including in the recommendation that we want a workshop, if that's what we all want, is probably the only way to really go. And I think other than that, we probably need to, if anybody has anything specific about this, probably address that. And it sounds like a lot of, maybe not everybody, but the consensus would be to also recommend that language be included in there, that it does come back, these do go through Planning Commission and we get a review.
Guess I'm not supportive of that, Commissioner Olivas, only because I don't think that's necessarily the right fix. I don't think we're asking that it all come back before the Planning Commission. I think there may be some instances, or many instances, in which they don't need to. And we're, so the question really is, what's the right mix? And that to me is the question of, do you want to try to draw that line in an intelligent way? Or you just want to, my view, slash and burn and just maximize the ability to do development agreements under the NRS, which is kind of what that's the approach to the objective on the code that was drafted and being proposed, is basically to say, let's allow the city council and staff the maximum discretion to do development agreements, which might be one legitimate way of going about it. I probably disagree with that. So I'm in a bit of a pickle, Commissioner Gower, because, I guess what I would say is I would vote against recommending the language because it should be workshopped, rather than voting to say, and because we disagree with the process for this critical element of the code. Staff, I think, has been diligently taking down our comments, and so they can provide those to the city council. What I worry about is if we just come up with a motion to say we want a workshop, it doesn't really give them the direction on whether we think this is a good proposal or a bad proposal. We think it's a proposal that should be workshopped. So I'm a bit of a pickle there, I guess.
Mr. Marshall, I'm ready to second your motion when you're ready to make it.
Madam Chair, will you accept the motion?
Yes, please make it.
I'm sorry, screen froze. Let me get back to the right place. In the matter of TXT 20-00006, I think I got that right. I move to recommend the City Council disapprove the text amendment by ordinance and send it back to Planning Commission for a workshop. And then if they disagree, that they have heard our input and that they make appropriate changes consistent with the language that at least I have decided. Oh, that's a terrible motion. That's a terrible motion. Carl, how can you not tell me that's a terrible motion?
Because it's my first night. Is this a joke?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Johnson, I was looking at the way, I think Commissioner Marshall started down the right route, and I was following him right until the part where he made it all about himself, which is pretty.
Usually do. Come on.
No, that's fine. I guess what I'm looking at is that, the proposed motion and the way we standardly do, typically do these is that we either recommend approval or we recommend denial. Those are kind of the two approaches that we have. And I think what I'm hearing from Commissioner Marshall, and don't let me put words in your mouth because that would be a terrible thing, but you're basically recommending denial as it's presented right now because you don't feel like we've had enough information and enough ability to review it. So it's not that you're necessarily disapproving the text amendment, you're disapproving what we have to review up to this point. At least that's where I'm coming from on this, is that I can't recommend approval of it as it's presented without additional opportunity myself to review it or, council to discuss it.
Commissioner Johnson, I would agree with that, but I also, I also just basically have some objections that I would vote no on, that I would disapprove.
Hey, gentlemen, I'm going to ask Carl what we can do. I feel like we're kind of going around in a circle. Are we just going to make a motion for to make the recommendation or not to make the recommendation?
I understand that the motion is to recommend denial of the text amendment. However, and with the recommendation that the text amendment be sent back to the Planning Commission for a workshop. There's also a recommendation from council that should the City Council want to consider and pass the text amendment, that those comments that the Planning Commission have the opportunity to review development agreements be part of council's recommendation. So staff can forward that recommendation to council should they decide to pass the text amendment. So does that make sense?
So moved.
So I'm going to throw something else out before you guys vote on that. what if we just scheduled another meeting and had a workshop for you guys to provide an opportunity for you guys to have a full discussion before this went to council? Right now, it's scheduled for council on July 22nd, but that still gives us 3 weeks to find a date. If we can get it on the agenda for your next meeting, which is July 15th, I'm not sure just with the noticing timeframes if that's going to work. But if that doesn't work, maybe we schedule it the week in between the 15th and the 22nd. If that gives you guys a better comfort level so that at least, I mean, we can still make them, you can still make the motion, but if we can give you an opportunity to actually have a discussion so that we can take those comments to city council, it might be worthwhile for all parties involved.
So Angela, go ahead.
I was gonna say, it sounds like more like a continuance to a date certain prior to the 22nd, so that we would have more time to, whatever amount of time we are able to find to think about it more, digest language, et cetera.
And maybe, can we take a 10-minute break? I can talk offline with legal and make sure that we can get this. Can we take a 10-minute break and we can come back to you?
Absolutely. Let's take a 10-minute.
Or give me a 5-minute break so we don't have to extend this. I have 8:04 right now. Why don't we resume at 8:10? Does that work for everyone?
Okay, we're taking a break. We'll be back at 8:10.
Thanks.
Okay, I have 8:10. Everybody back? I see everybody.
Okay.
Going
So
back
what I may
July
suggest,
1st.
sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Angela.
Okay, what I may suggest is that you continue it to a date certain. We'll continue it, if you choose to the July 15th. That's already a planning commission date. We can do the workshop, let's say from 5 to 6, and then you can vote on it on the regular agenda on that same night. So that would just be part of the normal public hearing process, but at least that would give you a meeting that you're already going to be at on July 15th, and that could still get all your comments in before it goes to council on the 22nd.
That sounds very reasonable to me, commissioners.
Commissioner Taylor, I'm just checking our regional planning commission meeting for that week. Is that on Thursday?
Let's look.
Commissioner Gauss, Commissioner Johnson, yes, I think they scheduled it for the Thursday because we had a already scheduled meeting on that Wednesday.
Yeah, okay. Just wanted to confirm. Thank you.
So,
If I might, Angela, is that, would you just, would staff actually be providing a substantive staff report for a workshop, or are we just recycling the current one that we have?
I think what we can do, you have the current staff report, it has the red lines, that gives you a little bit more time to review it. And then at the workshop, we'll go into more specific detail on what was taken out and why. And we'll go over what NRS requires so that you get a broader understanding of what was taken out because it's already included in NRS versus what was taken out for other reasons. So we can give you, I would say, a broader description of what it is. We can also give you some specific examples of development agreements that have been used so that you have a better understanding of how they're used in other jurisdictions. That might help as well. And we can provide that kind of information to you before the meeting so you can read up on that before the meeting.
On July 16th.
July 15th.
Our
Oh,
the
RPC.
regional planning is on, yeah.
So if you want to continue this item to date certain on July 15th, that is your next regularly scheduled planning commission meeting.
And regional planning is the 16th, is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So we will, do we need to entertain a motion for that?
You do.
Or do we
You'll need to continue it to that date certain.
Somebody like to?
I'll make a motion to continue this date certain to Wednesday, July 15th.
We have a motion and do we have a second?
Commissioner Johnson, I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. We've had plenty of discussion, but I'll ask for it. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll take a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Just a point of order, Carl, do we need a roll call vote on these, or can we voice vote?
Could you please do that?
Given the, do what?
Okay, Michelle, we have a roll call vote, please.
Yes, could you do roll call, please? So Kathleen Taylor,
Yes.
Peter Gower,
Yes.
John Marshall,
Yes.
Paula Levis,
Yes.
Alex Felto,
Yes.
Mark Johnson.
Yes.
We have a motion to continue to July 15th, and it was approved 6-0.
Moving on to item number 6, Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Liaison Report. Commissioner Johnson, Commissioner Gower?
Madam Chair, I'll just give a quick report. We have a meeting, as mentioned, on the 16th, and the purpose of that meeting is to review potential applicants for the Director of Regional Planning, which that position has been posted.
Thank you. Moving on to item 7, staff announcements.
Hi again. We have not had a city council meeting since our last planning commission meeting. Council is on their break. They generally take a break from council meetings kind of mid-June to mid-July. So we don't have any updates from council. No staffing changes, which is great. Nobody's left. I'm trying to think if there's anything else to update you on, but I don't think there is. I mean, there's been a lot going on just with COVID. We have been, very reactive to all of the governor's orders. So I would say generally just as a whole, we are busy dealing with businesses reopening and the mask wearing orders. So, life has been busy from that perspective.
Okay, thank you, Angela. Item 8, Commissioner's suggestion for future agenda items. Hearing, seeing none. Moving on to number 9. Michelle, do we have any public comment? This is for public comment on any action item or for general public comment?
No, I do not.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 10, possible adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Do we need a roll call vote?
No, you don't need to.